It's called Surrendered. Lucy lived to 22. Half Himalayan, she was a lovely dove gray, eyes as green as the spring tufts on pine trees. She went on walkabout. I never did find her body. Una, tortoiseshell with kidney issues, went in her sleep at 17. They died within months of each other. My grief was fierce. I could not imagine another cat. Now and again, I'd hold a friend's dog and think about a little poodle Maltese Papillon mix that would fit perfectly on my lap, look up at me with sparkling happy eyes, and be very cute. But I was dismayed by the idea that you couldn't leave a dog for hours, certainly not overnight as you could a cat, with food, water, and a litter box. In any case, I couldn't imagine how I would ever love an animal as I had the fine cat Una, with her expressive tail that curled and looped, writing magical words in the air. Then came the pandemic. I made it through a few weeks of lockdown before, with the encouragement of my wonderful sister Brett, who's rescued a number of dogs, I signed up on Pet Finder. For months, I scrolled through photos and descriptions, mostly dogs, some cats, but I could not make the move to fill my heart with another animal. It reminded me, in a most disconcerting way, of my efforts on Match.com. I'd find a profile that ticked most of the boxes, maybe even settle into a brief correspondence, but the energy would balk when I considered an actual meeting. I'm not sure what finally tilted me toward action. Perhaps it was the NPR essay that talked about all the dogs currently so happy having their humans around all the time. Perhaps it felt selfish not to share my home. Perhaps it was that all the aggregate faces of those abandoned, lost, unhomed animals began to fester. Suddenly, it was time. Within 2 days, I'd sent in queries about a pair of half-Siamese siblings and a dog, who in his Pet Finder photo looked like a Maltese, one of the boxes I ticked. White curly hair, looking over his shoulder with a winsome face. I'd also ticked older. I knew I did not have the temperament for a puppy. As Brett and I were en route to the Reno Humane Society to meet the dog, the Quincy shelter called to say that so far applicants for the kittens had only wanted the male. If you'll take both, they're yours. I want both, I said, and whooped with joy as Brett and I headed towards Reno. Gregario, as the shelter had named him, had been abandoned. All that curly fur turned out to have been matted and full of fleas, and after taking the photo, the shelter had sheared everything except his ears, which, including the fur, almost touched the ground. Under that body-wide buzz cut, his skin was a bright pink. He was sunburned. His teeth, crooked and rotten, stuck out of his mouth in all directions. He looked nothing like a Maltese. His legs were very short, his body very long, his eyes very sad. In no way was this dog cute. His teeth were the epitome of resnaggled. He was way too long to fit on my lap, not to mention those terribly, irrevocably sad eyes. But he was abandoned. As an older dog, 11, he'd be hard to place. This was early August. A poster on the wall behind the shelter's outtake desk announced they'd placed over 4,000 animals in the past month. So many people want companions these days, said Cindy, the cheery girl behind the desk. Cats and dogs, of course, but being in the desert, we also place snakes and rats and ferrets. I nodded, curiously close to tears. You don't have to do this, said Brett. Cindy explained that at first I'd be fostering. In order to officially adopt, I'd need to bring him back. The shelter would take care of those rotten teeth, and then he'd be mine. They'll pull them, she said, just as I finished signing the papers, and then his little tongue will hang out all the time. She demonstrated. So cute. My sister and I exchanged a look. Not just the sad eyes, not just the body too long to properly cuddle, but a dog with its tongue hanging out all the time. But I could see no way to back out, at least not at the moment. 2 days later, I left the dog with Brett and drove to Quincy to fetch the cats. I named them Boo and Radley. The love was immediate and complete, but the dog, while I'd read up on separation anxiety, I was clueless about how intense it was going to be. I also didn't know that any dog, not just an abandoned one, likes to be with you, know where you are at any and all moments, in the kitchen, outside watering, on the toilet. The bottomless need, especially as conveyed by those spaniely eyes, unnerved me. It was August. Too hot to leave him in a car while I shopped for groceries, but neither could I leave him alone. I dropped him with my sister every few days and ran errands as quickly as I could. I felt utterly trapped. It all became an existential metaphor, coiling itself around everything I did and thought. It's all about surface with you, my mind bickered. It's like that Scottish poet with the bad teeth. You still regret that you ignored his overtures. No wonder you're alone. It did not help that a friend warned me that older terriers develop heart trouble and limb trouble, that the care would be increasingly heartbreaking and expensive. Even though by this time I'd named him Mr. Darcy, which British formalities suited him, and I argued even charming Mr. Darcy gets old sometime, I knew I simply could not keep him. I called the shelter. "That's fine," said Cindy at the other end. "Our first available appointment for a surrender is Friday." Surrender. Not relinquish, not hand over, not give back. No, surrender. To yield something to the possession or power of another, deliver up possession of. Synonyms include waive and renounce, cede, and yes, abandon. So there I was, making an appointment to re-abandon. I had almost a week before the surrender, and to my surprise, I was glad. It gave me time to realize what I'd miss. His body beside me in the car, especially his delight putting his head out the passenger side window and letting the wind have in his ears. How he loved romping with my sister's dog, the way Radley and Boo bumped their heads beneath his chin in greeting each morning, and how the three of them created a welcome weight across the foot of my bed at night. And how the walks with him, morning, midday, and especially evening, slowed me down. While he snuffled around, checking his P-mail, doing his business, I took in early sun, glinting through branches, the stars wheeling across the sky. I was also coming to enjoy the chance meetings along paths and roads, pulling up our masks, keeping our distance. We watched our dogs pee and sniff while talking of breeds and weather and the color of moss on a nearby tree. Utterly pleasant conversations about nothing vital. I called the shelter and changed the appointment. No longer to surrender him, but to have those teeth pulled. When I picked him up from that operation, he'd no longer be a dog I was fostering, but one I'd officially adopted. It was a long day. The drive to Reno takes 2 hours, and I had to drop him before 7 a.m. He would not be released until late afternoon. As I waited, masked, outside, aware of what was now irrevocably in motion, smoke from the summer's ravaging fires hovered, making my eyes smart and my nose run as if I was weeping. I wasn't. But I understood that I was learning a different definition of surrender. Late that afternoon, after signing the papers that meant he was now mine, I carried him, conked out on painkillers, to the car. They'd removed 19 of his 42 teeth. As I lowered him into his bed in the front seat, he woke for a moment and looked at me with eyes that are not, in fact, limited to sad. That's just the shape of them. He gave my hand a lick. I saw then that his tongue would not loll out. They'd left the 2 bottom fangs. I tucked a blanket around him